Hello, hello, hello. You're on Cooler Talk with Rhonda and Cynthia. And
Wait,
today, yeah, there we go. Today we're going to talk about the ethical dilemma. Rhonda, you had kind of a run-in with this kind of situation, and just as we were gearing up for this morning show, you were sort of getting into the show. And so you started off by saying, "What grates you, Rhonda?" And so I think that's how we should kick off the show and just say, "What grates you, Rhonda, about certain people in business?"
it grates me in life to. I don't mean to sound like I don't know, maybe a cynic, but
No.
what grates me is um, someone who gets is like always overly excited about every single thing that they do,
Uh huh.
and there's one thing about being excited or
Mm-hmm.
having excitement. But then there's another thing about making something to be a bigger, larger, and better than it actually is.
Right. Or than you actually are, because when we
Right.
when we had originally talked about this situation, it had actually when we you had brought it up with me because you were like, Cynthia, I have this friend. We also have like similar businesses, and then I realized that she's not really a friend, and she's not really what she's saying she is, and she's not going through some of the life experiences that she's claiming to go through. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think we've all met those people.
I know this person has gone through the life experience they claim they've gone through. I know they've
Mhm.
gone through it. Um, but over time, I think the perception changed. And I'd rather not reference that particular situation.
Sure.
I'm more concerned about um, not getting any more attention, if you will,
Mhm.
because I'm not going to spend more money.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
maybe I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but isn't it an ethical or maybe it's a moral dilemma? Because I've had a lot of put some thought into it, and the main. I don't want to talk about that situation.
Okay.
I'd rather not. I've come to terms with it, um, and but like in relationships, whether they're friendships or romantic, business, or otherwise.
Mhm.
Um, I don't like to, in any aspect of life, I don't like to be led to believe that something is something when it's not.
Mhm. Yeah.
So don't act like you're my best buddy, but all of a sudden I'm like, well, I don't want to take this step a step further. So all of a sudden that person shifts their direction to other people. And
Right.
it's a dilemma in business because I've thought often, gosh, I wish my parents were still around because my dad was a businessman.
Mhm.
He was an entrepreneur. He owned a Ford franchise and then a couple other dealerships over time. And they were able to balance their business friendships and their personal friendships. Sometimes they intertwined, but I
Mhm.
noticed that if someone was doing business with him and then they decided they wanted to do something different, their relationship didn't change.
Right. Right.
So maybe I'm having a moral dilemma here. I don't know, but
Mhm.
My pet peeve is being led to believe that it's kind of like gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
And gaslighting is very much saying the sky is green, and I don't care what you say, but the sky is green.
Mm-hmm. Right. Nothing
And
can
I'm not
change my take on that. Mm-hmm.
right. So, well, you're wrong because the sky is green.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, I think what you're kind of like rubbing up against, and it is something that you see in business, and I think you notice it especially in business because sometimes the lines can blur between what's a business relationship and, let's say, a personal relationship.
Mhm.
And when those boundaries aren't really clear, at the very least for one party, then that for that party it might be there might seem to have been an infraction against that relationship. And um, and I think regardless of whether it's an ethical or a moral dilemma, I think the fact that there's no sort of pat solution to the problem is an indication that there's a dilemma there. And then obviously, one of the first things that you're going to address is, as a business person, is how much of my, like, I think I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this problem that I can't seem to find a solution for. And how would I address this problem? So we were talking about an ethical dilemma because I think on some level there was a realization that you had interpreted that relationship as a more personal relationship,
Yes.
whereas you realized when you were not able or willing or interested in sort of continuing that transactional aspect of that relationship, the person's personality kind of changed
Yeah,
vis-a-vis.
their direction changed.
Right.
And yeah, it's it was it was a shocking realization for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I I I tried to address some issues, but there got no resolution came out of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I had to create my own closure
Mm-hmm.
because there was no resolution. Um, it was always, so let's just turn this around and put it back on you.
Right.
And I realized that I can't have an open discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably shouldn't have brought it up in the first place. That's another thing. What do you bring up to people? What don't you? And then I made the mistake and I thought I sent a private message and it wasn't private. I'm like, oh God, then I just made things worse.
Oh. Uh-huh.
So, okay, I own up to that. I did. You promptly admit when you're wrong, and you
Right.
don't feel shame about it. So I screwed up,
Right.
and I'll just make. I'm trying to. I'm really making a conscious effort not to do that again,
Uh-huh.
because it was meant to be a private conversation, and I thought, oh no, what did I do? Um,
Uh,
so so it's time to let go. Maybe that can be repaired, maybe it can't. Uh,
right.
but that's going to depend on both parties involved.
Right. But that's also like a very entrepreneurial thing, and I think it's actually something that is that it is a burden on the entrepreneur to have to come up with their own solutions to problems.
Yes.
Whereas like in a professional setting where I find myself in right now, there I mean, we go through trainings to learn who it is that you can reach out to if you think there might be a dilemma. who it
Right.
is that you can talk to in order to figure out, is this an ethical dilemma, a moral dilemma? Is there some kind of, professional that I can talk to in order to, get coaching on a good resolution? And
Right.
all of that network does not exist when you're an entrepreneur.
I know.
Uh,
It does not.
No, it does not. And so even just being able to identify that you have a dilemma,
Mhm.
um, it's important, and it's an important step because it means this is probably taking up a lot of your mental, bandwidth, and it's distracting you from doing your job because
Well,
you still
that's
have
what
to
it
solve
does.
this problem. Mhm.
Exactly, that's what it does.
Yeah, yeah.
And, the see what the danger for me is when I get an emotional attachment. That's
Mhm,
where my problems come in.
mhm.
'Cause, if I feel like I, trust someone enough, I'll, eventually, you know, I think it's human nature to have an emotional attachment.
Sure.
And then it's kind of like just turning the spigot off.
Mhm.
It's sort of like being ghosted in
But
some ways.
that it's a really important part of the sales process. Know, like,
Yeah.
and trust, and so it's natural, I think, for you as a salesperson and also for you as a customer to kind of expect, at the very least, some kind of baseline.
Right.
And then when you realize that that baseline is off somehow, it will again, kind of like use up some of that mental bandwidth from doing
Yeah.
your job.
I perceived it as mixed messages.
Hmm.
And that happens in other areas of life too. I'm not just singling this out, but I am probably overly sensitive to consistency and mixed messages. Um,
Hmm.
so and when you're passionate about what you do, it does take it's your entire life, and I have to take that into account too.
Yep. Yep.
So people do grow apart, and
Hmm.
uh they do view things, they just grow apart.
Right.
And so I'm kind of astute to that, overly sensitive to that issue about um, the consistency and sending a consistent message.
Right. Right.
So, and my problem is I'm realizing that there is a gray area there, and I'm thinking in black and white terms, either or.
Hmm.
And life's not like that. It's not black and white. It's not either.
Hmm. Right.
And so I caught myself this week. I think too much.
Hmm. Well, I mean, and I do think that that is a one of the risks of working on your own.
Yeah.
You don't have anybody to sort of like bounce thoughts or problems off of that you
Mhm.
would in, say, more of like let's say a professional setting, or where you might have a team around you. Um, and I think that's one of the things that I wanted to maybe touch upon in this conversation about dilemmas, whether it's moral or ethical or otherwise, is first being able to identify that this isn't just a problem. Being able to identify, let's say, whether what you're dealing with is a problem that has a solution, or a dilemma that really doesn't have a pat solution.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you feel that it's a dilemma because you do not have the resources to come up with an appropriate solution for it. It's probably because, especially in my case, you don't have the legal background to handle it. And legal is a big thing. And it may actually even impact the kind of business or that you can continue to practice.
Right.
And so I wanted to just kind of like point out, sometimes when you're involved in certain businesses, you might have access to insider information,
Yeah.
potentially about like growth projects involved in the, let's say, affiliate company that you're working with or whatever. And you might have kind of like advanced information about them. And you really want to like you really want to discern whether you might be heading into a potentially problematic area.
Sure.
It might not be an issue at all, but it could be an issue, and just because you didn't know it was, doesn't mean that you didn't step into an ethical quagmire.
Right. Right. Yeah. What's the right thing to do in ethics? Well, I think it's important to have clear, concise boundaries.
Yeah, yeah, that is
Uh,
important.
Make sure those boundaries are clear and concise, and make sure that what you say and do uh, parallels. I forgot what I lost my train of thought.
Boundaries. So what you say and
Boundaries.
do parallels, I guess, like, I guess what you expect of the folks that you represent as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you
It all
know,
needs to be. It all needs to be consistent.
it does need to be
The right
consistent.
thing to do is not to embellish something to make it appear to be something that's bigger, better, and more than what it actually is. But you also
Right.
want to be excited about it at the same time. If you're, when you're excited about it,
Hmm.
express that excitement.
Hmm. But if you
And
have a
maybe you're just a positive. Maybe you're just a positive, upbeat person anyway, and
yeah,
that's just how you are. That can be
right. But
misinterpreted.
let's say, for example, and this is something, we've seen in the business as well. Um, you've been supporting a really good product or really good service, and it's something that you've been selling for a while. And then all of a sudden, the company says, "Listen, in about 2 weeks, we're going to overhaul we're going to
Mm.
restructure the payment plans. We're going to overhaul the program. We're going to repackage it and change it, but it's going to be bigger and better and wower and whatever." And you kind of realize, like, as you're playing with the yes, you want to be excited about it, but then the more you sort of tool around the new fandangle thing, you're sort of like, I feel like I'm believing in this less and less.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel comfortable selling this anymore. And that is, I would say that's an ethical dilemma, because you've basically been baited and switched,
It
with,
feels that it can feel that way.
yeah.
That's how it can feel, and and it's important. Can you discern
Hmm.
if that's the reality?
Yes.
Because there's so often, so frequently, a disparity between reality and perception, and perception is an individual's reality. Whether
Yes,
it's right or wrong, it isn't the point. The point is that's their perception.
for sure. But also be mindful of the fact that you might not be privy to all of the workings behind,
Right.
the curtain.
Yeah.
And so, you might be completely well intentioned, but before you know it, you're representing something that you don't think you can stand behind, or maybe you don't even know whether or not you can stand behind it anymore. But that won't protect you from the law. So,
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's like if you feel like you're dealing with a problem that is not easy to solve, but it is using up your mental bandwidth, it's also kind of eating away at your emotional
Yeah.
bandwidth, then you might be struggling with some kind of dilemma. The ethical dilemma is a bit more dangerous than the moral dilemma, but they are still, you know, they're dangerous to your business just because they do take up a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it's it can be distracting. At
Yes.
some point, you have to just say, well, I have to stop this thought process here
Yeah.
and redirect. And that redirection is really important to do to be able to move forward.
Yeah. And I think don't forget that just because you're in your business alone, that you are alone. There are resources there, and I mean, even among your friends, I'm sure you have some bright, brilliant people who have access to professionals, resources, people who can point you in the right direction. And I know across the US, there are a lot of free resources as well
Right.
to just kind of guide you in the right direction to help you discern the kind of the course of action that you should take moving forward, especially if that dilemma is, you know, paralyzing you and leaving
Mhm.
you sort of in a
Well, the old reliable Ben Franklin chart, the Franklin table.
what's that
You
table?
put the issue at the top,
Oh, uh-huh,
draw a line down the middle, you put the pluses on one side and the minuses on the other side.
uh-huh,
Or it could be that here are the problems on this side. On the right side, what's my part?
uh-huh.
And at some point down at the bottom, okay, what's the solution? So sometimes
Mhm.
it does help to get that on paper because it
Yes,
does look different than when it's twirling around in your head.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, um, yeah, perception is not always reality. So putting it on things on paper does help bring a little realism to the
Mhm, mhm.
situation. Um,
I
and I am, the path to me trusting someone is a very long path,
mhm,
a very long path. So, um, I don't open up that easily. I know that. Um, and That's another story, but um, we have to look at our personal issues in there too.
mhm,
So the ethics, so ethically, decisions that we make. Um, it's kind of like the saying I saw on a high school wall. The
mhm,
right thing to do is not always the popular thing to do, and
mhm.
the popular thing to do is not always the right thing to do. And when you have an exchange with someone, don't say, well, I was talking to these other people and they were concerned about this. And I'm like, my first thought is leave that this isn't between me and them. It's between me and you.
You. Mhm,
What are you bringing other people into
mhm,
this? What? So, another thing that came up recently was, about, let's say, like a group of people are together and then all of a sudden they're like gossiping about someone else who's not there to defend
mhm,
themselves.
mhm,
And um and it's a good point because I have done this in the
mhm,
past. And I have asked the question, and I've the same situation came up this week with someone I know, and it's like, how do I know when I'm not here that you're not talking about me like that?
right.
Because historically, if someone's gossiping to you,
Mhm.
they're going to gossip about you to
About
other
you.
people because they can't stop talking. They want
Yeah.
attention.
Yes, yes.
Um, So I try to keep other people out of it. Nobody who doesn't care. So, and that. So, what is the solution here? What is the summary? This is a big challenge I'm having right now. I'm kind of embarrassed having this recorded because usually I'm pretty straightforward about what I think, feel, and do, and I have clear boundaries. But sometimes things in life happen, and it's kind of like, what can I do about this?
Right. Well, I
The
think,
feelings, if the feelings don't adjust, they don't adjust.
uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, I really appreciate that you brought up this topic. It's not an easy topic. There is no pat solution. I mean, I just recently took trainings on dilemmas, moral, ethical, and otherwise. And,
Right.
which I guess is how I kind of like keyed into the fact that you were dealing with one. And that's the thing. There's no right or wrong. There is no black and white. This is completely gray area. And there could be legal ramifications, which also operate in the gray area and just around the loopholes. And most people who are in business for themselves, as well as most people who aren't in business for themselves and working for others, do not have the resources to handle a dilemma
Right.
single-handedly. And so I think it does bear. I think it's maybe it's not a sexy topic to address, but I think it is an important topic to address because we're all going to have to confront a dilemma and figure out what we're going to do about it or how we're going to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes that dilemma will involve another person where, we feel like we're no longer aligned with what they, the words they use, the actions they take.
Right.
Sometimes they might just be lying. I mean, and if you are if you're struggling with maybe a shift in the relationship because you feel like, hey, you know what, this guy is not being straightforward with me. I'm asking him or her, yes or no questions, and they're giving me all sorts of fluffy answers, then you might be facing a dilemma. And the same goes for if you're working for a company that's maybe changing their product, overhauling their, billing processes or what have you, and you're asking them point blank questions about how they're going to respond in this case or that case, how they're going to handle your customers and the relationships that you've built with your customers. And if you can't get sort of a straightforward answer, you're probably dealing with a dilemma.
Remember last week I told you about the team that was created when I used to sell hardware, software, and networking products. And one of the team members, because all of a sudden we opened up our password, so if we weren't available, the team could help our customers if they called in. This guy blatantly went in and stole and copied all the records of all of my customers, because I was one of the top salespeople. Copied all of my records of all of my customers, and then left the company and went to a similar industry and used that as his contact list. And how I knew is because I had great relationships with my customers. They were calling me. Who is this guy and why is he calling us?
Right.
That was the question I asked. So I used to, for many years, I worked at the polls during elections, and I happened to be in his district. And it was so odd because knowing what I knew, and this was a dilemma, he would come in and just stand there staring at me. And I'm going, this is just really odd and awkward. And then I started thinking, well, I know he was a thief.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would just be polite and courteous. That was the option I took. I'm not,
Right.
my intention is never to destroy somebody.
Mm-hmm.
My intentions are usually to resolve a dilemma, but
Mm-hmm.
that's probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to me.
Right.
That was around 2008. And, well, no, shortly before that, the economy was starting to take a nosedive anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Profit margins were like really got tight on electronic products. So, but in any case, outside of that, the guy was so, had such lack of confidence in his own skills that he felt he had to go steal somebody else's customers
Right.
to make his ends meet. That
Right.
was an ethical dilemma. He had an ethical choice.
Right.
He had an ethical choice to steal or not to steal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He did. I mean, actually, he committed a crime. He stole.
did commit a crime, but the company was closing down the division and they weren't going to back anything up.
Right.
They weren't gonna do anything. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, that was. I view it more as an unethical issue, and so I've never viewed that person the same again. And I'm like, and then I've heard stories over time where he has backstabbed people to get positions that he wanted, and my first response was, well, that's pretty consistent. He's being true to himself.
Well,
Anyway, so that's I just remembered about that story too, because that was part of why we wanted to talk about this also. Is that that's pretty lame when you feel you got to steal somebody else's business customer to make ends meet yourself. I mean,
yeah.
that's pretty lame.
I mean, yeah, he stole, but the other thing that he did was he used actually inside knowledge for his own benefit, and that would be
yes,
the ethical
like you were talking
breach.
about earlier. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you got to be around people you can trust. And,
yeah.
So yeah, interesting. Well, we're a couple minutes over our time.
Yeah, we are.
So how do we want to summarize? Let's see. Don't steal. I'll add this here. Don't steal.
Don't steal. You probably, well, yeah. I think as far as the dilemma, it's sometimes it's unclear what action you need to take or how you can resolve the problem.
Yeah.
So the problem is essentially a difficult one to identify. The solution, therefore, and your course of action is also difficult to identify. Just because you're working solo, don't feel like you're alone in this situation. There are resources. And it's probably best to open up the discussion with someone you do trust, especially if you feel like your trust has been broken, to maybe move towards a potential course of action for yourself.
Yeah. I hate that I'm more times than not right about people. Intuition, but usually I just go. I get this gut feeling, and I'm like, nope, this isn't a fit anymore, or there's something bad here. I have a bad feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Something's triggered that feeling. So, you just have to, to detach, and if things are meant to work out, they will.
I think this is a topic for a future show about trusting your gut.
Oh, yeah.
When to trust your gut and when to ignore your gut, because I'm hearing you mention that sometimes your gut's telling you don't trust this guy, and then you ignore your gut anyway.
Yeah, I get in trouble every time I don't listen to that little voice in my head, but live and learn.
Do you ignore your gut? Yeah, maybe that's something we can talk about in a couple weeks. I won't be here next week, by the way, but
I know.
you've joined us on Cooler Talk, and it was Rhonda and Cynthia talking about the ethical dilemma. Yep, there we go. Cynthia, Rhonda. Anyway, so see you next week at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I won't be there next week or the week after, but I'm sure Rhonda's got something lined up for y'all.
I'm working on it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.